Welcome to Bridging Chicago, a podcast that aims to connect our listeners to Chicago's business, community, cultural, and charity leaders.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. My name is Nathan, one of your hosts of the podcast, and I'm really grateful that you're here, decided to join us for another episode of Season 6. You can visit our website at www.bridgingchicago.com to learn all about this season and our prior 5 seasons of the podcast. Today, I am joined by Kim Close, Executive Director of the Foundation of Little Village. Kim founded the organization in 2018 and since then has worked to increase resources and opportunities available to small businesses in Little Village. She also manages the Fund for Equitable Business Growth Partnership Grant, which provides a network of Spanish language and entrepreneurial resources. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nathan.
Yeah, we are so excited to learn more about you and the organization and what it's doing there in Little Village and also about the Little Village community. But first, we are Bridging Chicago. We always like to start with hearing your Chicago story about what brought you here, if you grew up here, and sort of how you interact with the city.
Yeah, so I'm actually a Texas native.
Okay.
I think I moved to Chicago when I was about 25 or 26. I think it was just a little wanderlust and, in love with the architecture, culture, the lake, the music scene, the food, all of those things. So I came for a visit and then I came back for another visit and then another visit. And then I decided to relocate. The company I was working for at the time had a Chicago office. So okay. I transferred offices and continued working from Chicago. So yeah, I've been here close to 20 years, coming on 20 years now.
Yeah. Chicago has such a neighborhood mindset, but also I feel like, being a big city in the Midwest sort of gives you an understanding of what Chicago is, where we're not New York, we're not LA, because we're situated right here in the heart of the Midwest. But, I grew up in a town of 1,600 people downstate, so Chicago to me is very different than where I grew up. So for you coming from Texas, what did you see or what did you feel about the city that made you kind of connect with that neighborhood network and that mentality of, these small little neighborhoods within a big city?
Yeah. So when I graduated college, I actually moved to the East Coast and I was living in DC. And then, and there's definitely like an East Coast vibe. And I was in love with it in my youth. But when I was visiting the Midwest, it definitely had more of like a sort of like a homey Midwest feel, and I felt like sometimes the interactions with people on the East Coast or in DC were kind of cold, so I felt more I just felt more like people were just nicer here, to be honest, like the wait staff and I don't know, sometimes, I was driving the other day and, I waved at some people as I let them in. It's such like a Southern thing, and I forget sometimes that people don't do that. I still do it, but, people wave back of you wave. And so that type, I know it's kind of subtle, but that type of, I just felt more at home here than I did, kind of on the East Coast, that sort of homey Midwest vibe.
Yeah, I definitely enjoy it. What did you do when you first moved here to Chicago?
So I traded foreign currencies. I worked for a company that helped importers, basically pay bills and pay, even pay staff, in all the currencies in the world that you could imagine. Kind of like Western Union, but it was for private businesses, doing international trade.
Yeah.
So.
And we know that you have been an entrepreneur for 10 years now. So how did you go from the trading or sort of the public sector to, I'm going to start something, I have an idea, I see a need,
Yeah,
be an entrepreneur?
I wish that I wish I could say that I really saw a need and identified a gap in the market. But, I think I started my own personal entrepreneurial journey when I was not long after I came to Chicago, maybe 26, 27. And I think I was just pursuing a dream.
Okay.
Which is, how a lot of like young people start like decide to venture off that path that's like set for them, you know, like go to college, get a degree, get a job in corporate America. And then I was like, but, you know, you grow up and then you're like, well, what do I want my life to be? So, you know, I started a different entrepreneurial journey of like pursuing what my interests were about, you know, and I learned a lot in that journey. I learned a lot about the difference between having a hobby and having a business, and what it means to have a successful business. And at the end of the day, I closed up shop, but you know, it was very difficult. I call it the worst breakup of my life, like shutting down my business. But it was also, you know, it was a little bit of tough medicine, but that was like what I had to like learn from that experience, you know, like it felt like a severe failure on my part, but it was like until I had that experience of like, you know, sort of shutting down when I had invested so much of my heart and soul into, you know, that I was able to grow and learn like, well, what didn't work for me and what, you know, how can I save other entrepreneurs this pain, you know?
Yeah. I think when I hear about small businesses or entrepreneurs who just say like, all right, I tried it, didn't work, move on, or try something else, or, you know, get a job, or, you know, wherever they're at that point. I think in some ways it is like heartbreak, because I think the courage that it takes to go out and do something like that, you feel like it deserves to be rewarded, and it sometimes just isn't. And have you seen that in your experience either? I mean, I know you talked about your shop, but with other people as well, have you seen where it's like they do the work, but it just doesn't quite get successful enough to continue to do it, you know, for as long as you need to?
Yeah. So one of the most difficult lessons, there are people who are like truly have an entrepreneurial mindset, and they're going to start, they run multiple businesses. They're going to continue to start businesses until they find probably not even just one that works, but multiple, like they're interested in creating multiple revenue streams that are, you know, increase their success, you know?
Yeah.
But, and then there's another brand of entrepreneur that is like really pursuing a passion. And I've talked with our financial literacy instructor about this type of entrepreneur. And of course, in some ways they're the most driven, but in other ways, they really want the market to validate their passion. And as opposed to like people who have more of a growth, entrepreneurs that have more of a growth oriented mindset, understand that they have to either create a market that doesn't exist, or like find gaps in the market where they can create an innovative product or service that will attract new customers. But so if there's already 15 competitors selling, you know, actually Little Village could be used as a good example of this. You know, in Little Village there are over 100 food businesses, you know, and they are selling different types of Mexican food, panaderias, all sorts of things, but it's highly, highly competitive to open. I can't tell you how many taco shops I see open on 26th Street that are there for like less than 6 months, you know, and that's their dream. And I know that they believe that they have the best taco. It's a very, very competitive market to sell tacos in Little Village, but there's other parts of the city that, you know, are probably in dire need of a really good taco, you know, and so if they could find the right market, they could perhaps achieve a success that they can't achieve because there's too high of a competition. And it's not that they lack the passion, you know, of course, like they want to have a successful taqueria in Little Village, but they have to just do more market analysis, understand their client profile, their value proposition, and, you know, make business decisions based on their current position in the market, you know, so.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, you made a point in there about sort of the spirit and sort of, some entrepreneurs feel like they need to start many at one time, or some, do many aspects of their business, kind of wanting to just do a lot of things. Do you feel like people like that tend to attract other people and kind of bring them all together? Because I feel like when I hear from, we all know about the side hustle, everyone, a lot of people have a side hustle now, but for entrepreneurs, I feel like, do they side hustle together? Like, do they work together to kind of say, okay, you need this, I have this, I have a day, a month that I can help you, put together your newsletter or put together your marketing stuff or whatever it might be?
So this is actually one of the things that the foundation of Little Village is actively investing in, is creating this network effect, and working together to create what's known as social capital, and building an entrepreneur's social capital and their network of resources. It does lead to further success. So there's this myth that you can make it just like on your own,
Yeah.
And that if you're intelligent enough and passionate enough, like, you can overcome all the challenges. But what research and what, just experience has shown to successful entrepreneurs is that they need to build this network effect around them, to amplify their message and bring higher levels of expertise into their like small business model, because they can't necessarily be an expert in everything. So they need to, if they have a weak spot, my weak spot is social media. Like I can barely post a photo, but it's like, I have a social media manager who can get our message out there and create that content for us. So same thing goes with any sort of entrepreneur. It's like, they just need to identify their gaps and like attract in the right resources and build a stronger network. And actually the programming that we run, Juntos Lanzamos for businesses in ideation stage, and Juntos Emprendemos for businesses that are trying to grow, businesses that maybe have 1 to 2 years under their belt. Like, the cohorts themselves function as like a referral network, and they can share experiences and begin to build those relationships that help them. And for any of the listeners out there that are Little Village, they know that this was the power of the discount mall, is that you had 300 vendors in one spot, so you could get a quinceañera dress and like get your music and for your event, and like get go to the joyeria and get gifts and all of this stuff in one place. And so they had that. And the vendors are still there. There's about half capacity right now, but that they built that in that space, and that's why it was such a powerful marketplace.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Little Village, it's a neighborhood here in the city, but for people who haven't been there, can you share about what Little Village is like, and then how your connection came to be with Little Village?
Yeah, so, Little Village is the best neighborhood in Chicago, in my humble opinion. And it is the name is a little bit of a misnomer. Little Village, or as a lot of the residents call it, La Villita. It is little, but it's actually a big economic powerhouse within the city and the state of Illinois. It's also known as the Second Magnificent Mile, 26th Street, which is a 2-mile long commercial corridor stretching from California to Costner. And it is known for being the second highest tax revenue creator in the city.
Wow.
And it is clearly important on the state level as well.
Yeah.
There are I don't know how many standalone brick and mortar businesses, maybe upwards of 200 to 300, like, maybe on the corridor, there's close to 200. There's the discount mall. So you're going to find, but what makes it really important too, it's also known as the Mexico of the Midwest. And that, so you're going to find like best Mexican food outside of Mexico, like in Little Village, and also quinceañera shops and joyerias and like clubs and just everything. It's a cultural mecca. It's a port of entry also for immigrants into the United States. A couple years ago, the Little Village Arch received a historical marker status, and this arch is it's a cultural icon. It represents Little Village, but it's also, it says "Bienvenidos a Little Village." And it's welcoming like people to that community, but also into the United States.
Yeah. Okay. And then did you move to Little Village, or how did you?
Yeah. So I'm not living in Little Village currently, but I did live there. I've been working in Little Village for 5 years. I lived there 2 of those 5 years. And yeah. Yeah, I lived on 26th and Millard, like in the heart of the community. Yeah. And I lived across the street from my office. So
yeah. It's such a vibrant community. Like there's always, it's just like, there's always people there and people who are very happy to be there. And I think when you think about Chicago and when you see Chicago on most things, you do see downtown, you do see the lake, you do see the skyline. And yeah, if you have that, you're going to show it off, certainly. But I've only been to Little Village a couple times, and one of the senses that I got from it was that people who live there because they want to, because they love it, because that's home. And it's like, sometimes I think that people feel like people live in certain places because they have to, or because that's where their culture is, or whatever. And it's like, well, and it's one of the things that was clear to me is in Little Village, people choose to live there because of what you feel and what you get from the neighborhood and what you can give back to the neighborhood. Like it's definitely seems like a choice of the neighbors to be in the community and a part of the community there.
Yeah, I think I had a little bit of a strange, like circuitous route to get to Little Village because I started working in Little Village because I was hired to write grants to bring money into the community. To bring to do things like find a grant, to get funding, to run an entrepreneurial cohort. Like, I did not create that cohort, and just one note on the Juntos programming that we run is that this programming is original Spanish language content. So it was written by business advisors working in Little Village, seeing what was coming in through the door and what they needed help with. It wasn't an English language content that was just created to work nationwide that was then like translated into Spanish. It was created it was created to be place-based and specific to Little Village and the surrounding communities and the unique business challenges that that those business owners are faced with. So so I just started working and writing to attract in philanthropic dollars to be invested in Little Village. Now, as everybody knows, well, as I stated previously, Little Village is this huge tax base, right? From this very vibrant commercial corridor, but it doesn't, those same tax dollars don't always get reinvested back into the community in the same way that they might in other neighborhoods across the city of Chicago. And so, like any good entrepreneur, there was a big gap in Little Village that that opened up that philanthropic partners and funders were interested in, which was that they were interested in having an economic development center put in, an economic development engine put in Little Village to support what was already happening there, you know, to support, there's thousands of entrepreneurs, it is the people of the residents of Little Village are highly entrepreneurial, probably more so than anybody else, than any other community in the city, right? But they didn't have the same access to resources, the same access to programming, and they didn't have the same, there lacked like a type of organizational support and programming to help them overcome their initial challenges to building familial wealth, community wealth through entrepreneurial and business activities. That was already what was happening.
Okay.
There was a lack of services to match that. So when when the board of directors identified this gap, it became it was incredibly easy to sort of build an organization around that, because it's not, because the things that were happening, look, it wasn't a hard sell. The things that, the cases that I had to make to get the funding, it was like the community speaks for itself. Look at what they're already doing.
Right.
What could be the return on investment if you supported these businesses, with this programming, with micro granting, this type of thing? The impact that you could create would be huge. So that was the inception of the organization and this impact driven work, So
is that what sort of separates your organization from being a local chamber of commerce, this sort of equitable think tank, essentially, of reinvestment of the community itself, and sort of saying, okay, we have a bunch of entrepreneurs here, how do we invest in those with what's already here and sort of get them investing in each other?
Yeah, so excellent question. So the foundation of Little Village, we actually are funded to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem of partnerships that we can then use for referrals and programmatic partners and stuff like that. So the Little Village Chamber of Commerce is one of our partners. And they, as everybody knows, they put on the best Mexican Independence Day parade. Great weather this year for the parade. It was fantastic. And then they also do a lot of networking events that help build social capital, as we talked about. And then they do a lot of other things like promoting the neighborhood, beautification of the neighborhood through the SSA. And so what our organization is doing is leveraging partnerships like that to bring value and impact to the community, but also because we have a 501c3 status, what our vision and mission really is to build community wealth, preserve the cultural identity, and bring do corridor revitalization through bringing investment into the community. And by that, I want to be very specific about that. What we're talking about is having current business owners acquire their properties instead of renting their properties. It's a way of preventing gentrification and building community wealth and preserving the cultural identity. So we have helped multiple businesses on the corridor acquire the buildings that they're in and renovate the buildings, which is what the foundation is actually in the middle of doing, as well as we acquired a property on 26th and Drake known as the Esquina Incubator and Cafe, and we're currently in the process of a redevelopment of that building to create a business incubator with a community cafe operated by Catedral and the amazing Chef Ambrosio, and also a shared commercial kitchen because of the high number of restaurant entrepreneurs that exist. Restaurant and food business entrepreneurs, like consumer packaged goods like salsa, things like that could be done in a commercial kitchen in Little Village, and then accompanied with a co-working space for people who have, say you have a podcast. We're trying to fund a multimedia room and you want to have a podcast. You could have that space in the co-working space upstairs, and conference rooms that are available to the use of the community and free Wi-Fi. So it's
it's huge. With all that, I mean, you talk a lot about partnerships with organizations and with the community. How do you identify good partnerships? How do you lean into those and use those in a way that benefits, both sides of that partnership?
Yeah, so I would say the most important way that we learn about identifying partnerships is from the participants that we service. They're like, hey, do you know somebody who... And then I'm like, no, I don't. And then, and then you start researching, you start picking up the phone and making phone calls and trying to fill in the gaps, you know? But then sometimes people partner with us, one of our newest partnerships is with Northwest Side CDC in Belmont-Cragen. Like we're
delivering. They've been on the podcast.
Yeah. Jason Estremera, and Jessica Vasquez. Yeah, so we're partnered, we're delivering Juntos Emprendemos in Belmont-Cragen, through the partnership because they wanted to, have an entrepreneurial cohort for their business owners up there. So
wow, small world. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, Kim, I've learned so much about what you're doing and about the Little Village itself, but I think it's very exciting to hear, and I think the reinvestment piece is really important because. Like in a world that is never really fair, and maybe as adults we shouldn't expect fair anymore. It doesn't seem fair for a community that is so important in the financial landscape of the state, even just to not get that reinvestment of what they're generating. I think life isn't fair, but that doesn't seem fair. So I'm glad that. There are organizations like yours that are doing that work. And I know that there are others down there as well. Yeah.
It is a strong community of nonprofit leaders working together to help the entire community achieve more equitable livelihood.
Yeah. So great. Well, thank you again for joining us. And of course, we want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. You can learn more about the Foundation of Little Village by visiting their website, www.flvchicago.org, or by visiting them on Instagram using their handle @FLVChicago. You can also find more information and listen to our other episodes of the podcast at www.bridgingchicago.com or by visiting us on Instagram and Twitter, where our handle is @BridgingChicago. And of course, you can always connect with us on LinkedIn by searching Bridging Chicago. Thanks. We'll see you on another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.